Robert had always been the kind of man who never asked for much in life. At 58 years old, he had worked as a mailman for over 30 years, walking the same streets, delivering letters to the same neighbors, always with a smile and a kind word. He wasn't rich and he didn't live in a fancy house, but he had something worth more than money. He had his family. Life hadn't always been easy for Robert. 15 years ago, his wife passed away after a long battle with cancer. It was the hardest thing he'd ever been through. Suddenly he was alone, raising 3 kids without their mother. His youngest was only 7 at the time. There were nights when he didn't know if he could do it. Nights when he sat at the kitchen table after the kids went to bed, wondering how he was going to pay the bills and still be there for them. But he did it. He worked double shifts when he had to. He learned to cook their favorite meals, even if they didn't taste quite like Mom's. He helped with homework, attended every school play, and never missed a soccer game. He became both mother and father, and though it wore him down some days, he wouldn't have changed a thing. His oldest boy, Tommy, had always been different from the other 2. While his daughter wanted to be a teacher and his youngest dreamed of becoming a chef, Tommy had other plans. At 19, he walked into the kitchen one morning and told Robert he wanted to join the army. Robert's heart sank. He'd just got the boy through high school and now he wanted to go off to war? But when he looked into Tommy's eyes, he saw determination. He saw purpose, and Robert knew he couldn't stand in his way. That was 2 years ago. 2 long years of worrying, of watching the news with his stomach in knots, of jumping every time the phone rang. But Tommy had done well. He'd served with honor, earned medals, and made his old man proud. And now finally he was coming home. Just 1 more week. On this particular Saturday morning in November, Robert woke up earlier than usual. He had plans to meet his daughter and her 2 little ones for breakfast at the family restaurant downtown. It was their spot, the place they'd been going to for years. After breakfast, they were going to do some shopping for Tommy's homecoming party. Robert wanted everything to be perfect. He stood in front of his bedroom mirror, pulling on his favorite jacket. It was old, a bit worn at the elbows, but he loved it more than any piece of clothing he'd ever owned. The jacket was covered in patches and pins, each one telling a story about Tommy's service. There was the Army emblem, the unit patch from Tommy's division, a small American flag, and his personal favorite, a pin that simply said, "Proud Army Dad," in gold letters. His daughter had given him that pin the day Tommy left for basic training. Robert ran his hand over the patches, feeling a familiar warmth in his chest. Pride, that's what it was. Pure simple pride. His son was a soldier. His son was serving his country, and in 1 week his son would be home safe. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through his photos while he waited for his coffee to brew. There was Tommy in his uniform at graduation, standing tall and serious. Another one of Tommy with his unit, all of them grinning like kids despite being in the middle of nowhere. There was a recent one Tommy had sent just last week, giving a thumbs up to the camera with a desert sunset behind him. Robert smiled. 1 more week. The restaurant was busy when he arrived, filled with the usual Saturday morning crowd. Families with kids, elderly couples reading newspapers, groups of friends catching up over pancakes. Robert loved the energy of it. He found an empty table near the middle of the room and settled in, placing his phone on the table. His daughter had texted that she was running a few minutes late. Traffic was bad. No problem. He'd wait. He sat there, comfortable and content, occasionally glancing at his phone. A waitress came by and he ordered coffee, black the way he'd been drinking it since he was 20. Around him, the restaurant buzzed with conversation and the clinking of silverware. Someone's baby was laughing. An old song played softly from the speakers overhead. Robert tapped his foot to the rhythm. He didn't notice anyone staring at his jacket. He didn't see the looks, some approving, others less so. He was just a father waiting for his daughter, thinking about his son coming home, mentally planning the party they'd throw. Maybe they'd barbecue in the backyard. Tommy loved his burgers. They'd invite the whole neighborhood just like the old days. Robert adjusted his seat, getting more comfortable, and as he did, his elbow bumped the table next to him. Not hard, just a light tap. But it was enough to make the coffee cup on that table wobble. A few drops spilled onto the saucer. He turned immediately, an apology already on his lips. That's when he saw the man at the next table staring at him, and the look in that man's eyes made Robert's stomach tighten. Something was wrong. Something was about to happen. And Robert, sitting there in his proud father's jacket, had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything. The man at the next table was probably in his early 40s, dressed in an expensive-looking suit with a perfectly knotted tie. His wife sat across from him, equally well-dressed, her hair styled like she'd just come from a salon. They looked like the type of people who had important jobs and drove nice cars. Robert had delivered mail to houses like theirs for years. "I'm so sorry about that," Robert said quickly, gesturing to the spilled coffee. "Didn't mean to bump your table." "My fault entirely." The man didn't respond right away. He just stared at Robert's jacket, his eyes moving slowly from patch to patch, pin to pin. His jaw was tight, and there was something cold in his expression that made Robert uncomfortable. The man's wife touched his arm gently as if trying to calm him down, but he pulled away. "Figures," the man finally said, loud enough that people at nearby tables could hear. His voice had an edge to it, sharp and cutting. Robert blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" "Of course it's someone like you," the man continued, his voice getting louder. He gestured at Robert's jacket with disgust. "Wearing that propaganda like you're some kind of hero." The conversations around them started to die down. People were turning to look. Robert felt his face getting hot. He didn't understand what was happening. He just bumped a table. He'd apologized. What did his jacket have to do with anything? I'm not a hero," Robert stammered. "My son is in the army. I'm just his dad." The man stood up now, and Robert noticed he was tall, probably 6 feet or more. He towered over Robert, who was still sitting down, making him feel small and trapped. The man's face was red with anger, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Your son," the man spat the words out like they tasted bad. "Do you have any idea what people like your son do overseas? The damage? The destruction? The innocent lives destroyed?" Robert's mouth went dry. He tried to stand up, to somehow even the playing field, but his legs felt weak. Around them, the entire restaurant had gone quiet. Forks and knives stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the place was now on their corner of the room. Robert could feel them all watching, judging, waiting to see what would happen next. "My son serves to protect our country," Robert said quietly, his voice shaking. "He's a good man. He believes in what he's doing." "Protect?" The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what they tell you? Is that what you tell yourself so you can sleep at night? Wake up. The military is nothing but a machine that chews up young men and spits them out, and for what? For oil? For politics? For corporate interests?" Robert felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. His hands were trembling now, and he clasped them together under the table so no one would see. He wanted to defend Tommy, to defend all the young men and women who served, but the words wouldn't come. His throat felt tight and his eyes were starting to burn. "He's coming home next week," Robert managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's been gone for 2 years. He's my son." "Then you should be ashamed," the man shot back. "Ashamed for letting him sign up. Ashamed for supporting it. Ashamed for walking around in public wearing that jacket like you're proud of contributing to violence and death." The man's wife was pulling on his sleeve now, whispering urgently for him to sit down, to stop, that he was making a scene. But he shook her off, too caught up in his anger to care. Robert felt tears pricking at his eyes, and he hated himself for it. He was 58 years old. He'd raised 3 kids alone. He'd survived the death of his wife. He'd worked through injuries and illness and never complained. But right now, in this crowded restaurant with dozens of strangers watching, he felt like a child being scolded by a teacher. He felt humiliated, embarrassed, small. He thought about Tommy, probably waking up right now on the other side of the world, getting ready for another day of serving his country. Tommy, who'd written letters home talking about helping local villagers, about building schools, about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Tommy, who called his old man every chance he got just to say he loved him. Was Robert supposed to be ashamed of that? Was he supposed to take off this jacket and hide his pride in his son? But the words still wouldn't come. Robert just sat there frozen, his face burning with shame, wishing he could disappear, wishing his daughter would arrive and rescue him, wishing he'd chosen a different table, a different restaurant, a different day. The man was still talking, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant, lecturing Robert about foreign policy and military interventions and things Robert didn't fully understand. Each word felt like another weight pressing down on his chest. He wanted to argue back. He wanted to stand up for Tommy. He wanted to explain that his son was a good person, that the men and women in uniform weren't monsters, that they were somebody's children, somebody's siblings, somebody's friends, but he couldn't. He just sat there, taking it, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing second. Around him, people watched. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable, like they wished they were anywhere else. A few seemed to agree with the angry man, nodding along with his words. Robert's coffee sat in front of him, getting cold. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter, probably saying she'd be there soon. But he didn't pick it up. He couldn't move. He could only sit there, drowning in his humiliation, waiting for this nightmare to end. What Robert didn't know, what he couldn't see through his embarrassment and pain, was that scattered throughout that restaurant were 6 people who'd been watching the whole thing unfold. 6 people who'd noticed his jacket the moment he walked in. 6 people who understood exactly what those patches meant. And 6 people who were about to do something that would change everything. They were spread out across the restaurant, sitting at different tables, looking like regular people having regular Saturday breakfasts. Nobody would have picked them out of a crowd. They wore jeans and t-shirts, hoodies and sneakers. They could have been college students, office workers, or just friends meeting up for a meal. Nothing about them screamed special or different, but they were different. Very different. At a table near the window sat a young woman named Lisa, barely 25, having breakfast with her younger brother. She had her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wore a university sweatshirt. She'd been laughing at something her brother said when she first noticed Robert walk in. Her eyes had immediately gone to his jacket, reading each patch like a familiar language. She knew what they meant. She'd worn similar ones herself not too long ago. Over by the counter, waiting for a to-go order, stood a tall Hispanic man in his early 30s. His name was Miguel, and he had kind eyes and a strong build that came from years of physical training. He'd been scrolling through his phone when the commotion started. Now his phone was forgotten, still in his hand, but his attention was completely focused on what was happening across the room. Near the back, at a booth tucked into the corner, sat 2 people who'd been having a quiet conversation over coffee. The older woman, Patricia, was in her late 20s with close-cropped hair and an easy smile. Across from her sat a younger guy, fresh-faced and maybe 21, named Danny. They'd been discussing his adjustment back to civilian life when they both heard the angry man's voice rising above the breakfast chatter. Standing near the hallway that led to the restrooms was a man named Kevin. He was Korean-American, wearing glasses and a button-down shirt, looking more like a teacher than anything else. He'd been on his way back to his table when he'd frozen in place, watching the scene unfold, and sitting alone at the bar, picking at a plate of eggs he'd suddenly lost his appetite for, was a black man named Anthony. He was younger than the others, maybe 23, with a quiet demeanor and thoughtful eyes. He'd been in the same region where Robert's son was currently stationed. In fact, he'd only been home for 6 weeks. None of these 6 people knew each other. They'd never met before this moment. They came from different places, different backgrounds, different units, but they all had one thing in common. They'd all served. They were all soldiers, some active duty, some reserves, some recently returned, and they all recognized what was happening to Robert. They'd all seen that jacket. They'd all noted the specific patches, the unit insignias, the proud parent pin, and they'd all felt a connection to this stranger they'd never met. This father who wore his son's service like a badge of honor. Now, watching him being torn down in public, unable to defend himself, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't planned. Nobody gave a signal or made a phone call, but somehow in that moment they all knew what needed to happen. Miguel moved first. He set his phone down on the counter and walked with steady, purposeful steps toward Robert's table. His face was calm but determined. As he walked, he made eye contact with Lisa across the room. She nodded once, understanding immediately, and stood up from her table, whispering something quick to her brother. Patricia saw Miguel moving and touched Danny's arm. Without a word, they both got up. Kevin was already walking from the hallway, and Anthony slid off his bar stool, leaving money on the counter for his unfinished breakfast. The angry man was still talking, still lecturing Robert about military policy and overseas operations, his voice filled with righteous indignation. His wife had her face in her hands now, clearly mortified. Robert sat frozen, looking down at his table, his shoulders hunched, trying to make himself invisible. That's when Miguel arrived at the table. He stood there for just a moment, tall and solid, and when he spoke, his voice was respectful but carried a quiet authority that made several people nearby sit up straighter. "Excuse me, sir," he said, looking directly at Robert, completely ignoring the angry man. "Is this seat taken?" Robert looked up, confused, his eyes red and wet. He opened his mouth but couldn't find words. Before he could answer, Lisa appeared on his other side, pulling out the chair across from him. "Do you mind if we join you?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Then came Patricia and Danny, moving chairs from a nearby empty table. Kevin appeared with another chair. Anthony brought up the rear, completing the circle. Within 30 seconds, Robert found himself surrounded. 6 strangers, all in civilian clothes, all looking at him with expressions of respect and understanding. The angry man had stopped talking mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open slightly, clearly thrown off by this unexpected turn of events. "We couldn't help but notice your jacket." "Sir," Kevin said, adjusting his glasses as he sat down. His voice was soft but clear enough for nearby tables to hear. "That's the unit patch from the division that served in Afghanistan. My father wore the same one. And that pin," Anthony added, pointing to the proud Army Dad pin on Robert's chest. "That means you have a son or daughter serving. Am I right?" Robert nodded, still too stunned to speak properly. He looked around at the 6 faces now surrounding him, protecting him, and something in his chest began to unclench. "My son," he managed to whisper. "Tommy, he's in the Army, coming home next week." "Then, sir, if you'll allow us," Patricia said, and there was warmth in her voice that made Robert's eyes well up again. "But for a different reason this time. We'd like to buy your breakfast this morning. It's the absolute least we can do." Miguel nodded in agreement. "For a military parent," he added. "Someone who understands sacrifice." Around the restaurant, the atmosphere had completely shifted. The angry man had sat back down, his face now red for an entirely different reason. His wife was pulling him by the arm, trying to get him to leave. People at other tables were watching this new development with interest. Someone in the back of the restaurant started clapping. Just one person at first, slow and deliberate. Then another joined in. Then another. Within moments, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Robert sat in the middle of it all, surrounded by 6 soldiers who'd chosen to stand when he couldn't stand for himself. And for the first time since this whole terrible encounter began, he felt something other than shame. He felt protected. He felt valued. He felt seen. The applause eventually died down, but the energy in the restaurant had completely changed. What had been tense and uncomfortable just minutes ago now felt warm, almost celebratory. The angry man and his wife had left, slipping out quietly while everyone's attention was focused on Robert and his unexpected protectors. Nobody seemed to notice them go, and nobody seemed to care. Robert sat there, still trying to process what had just happened. His hands had stopped shaking, but his heart was racing for an entirely different reason now. These 6 strangers, these young people who could have easily ignored what was happening and minded their own business, had chosen to stand up for him. Literally. They'd surrounded him like a protective wall, and he didn't even know their names. I don't know what to say," Robert finally managed, his voice still shaky but stronger than before. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, we did," Lisa said simply, and there was no doubt in her voice. "We absolutely did." Miguel leaned back in his chair, his expression relaxed now. "How long has your son been in?" he asked, and the question was casual, friendly, like they were old friends catching up. 2 years, Robert answered, and just talking about Tommy made him sit up a little straighter. He enlisted right out of high school. Scared me half to death, if I'm being honest. But he was determined. Said he wanted to serve, wanted to make a difference. "That takes courage," Patricia said, and she meant it, both for him to go and for you to let him. Robert smiled for the first time that morning, a real smile that reached his eyes. I didn't really have a choice. When Tommy makes up his mind about something, that's it. Gets that from his mother. His smile faltered just a bit at the mention of his late wife, but he pushed through. She would have been proud of him. She would have been terrified too, but proud. "What does he do in the Army?" Danny asked. He was the youngest of the group, and there was genuine curiosity in his question. "He's a medic," Robert said, and the pride was unmistakable in his voice now. "He helps people, treats injuries, provides medical care. He's written me letters about helping local families, especially kids." There was this one story about a little girl who'd been hurt and he—" Robert's voice caught. "He saved her life. He's out there saving lives." Anthony, who'd been quiet until now, nodded slowly. "Medics are special," he said softly. "They're the ones who run toward danger when everyone else is running away. Your son is doing important work, sir. Really important work." "Tell us about him," Kevin said, gesturing to Robert's phone on the table. "You got pictures?" Robert's face lit up. He picked up his phone with hands that were now steady and started scrolling through his photos. The 6 soldiers leaned in, genuinely interested as Robert showed them picture after picture. Tommy at basic training, looking impossibly young and serious. Tommy with his unit grinning at the camera. Tommy in his full uniform at graduation standing at attention. "He looks like you," Lisa observed, pointing at one photo. "Same eyes." "That's what everyone says," Robert laughed. "But he got his mother's smile, thank God. Mine's nothing special." They spent the next hour like that, just talking. The conversation flowed easily, naturally. The soldiers shared stories, carefully worded ones that didn't reveal anything classified or too detailed, but enough to give Robert a sense of their experiences. Lisa talked about the friendships she'd made during her service, bonds that felt stronger than blood. Miguel mentioned the pride he felt when he put on his uniform for the first time. Patricia described the challenge of leadership, of being responsible for other people's lives. Robert listened to every word, soaking it in. These weren't just soldiers to him anymore. They were real people with real stories, hopes, and fears. They were someone's children too, someone's siblings and friends. And each of them, in their own way, was helping Robert understand what Tommy's life had been like for the past 2 years. The waitress came by several times, refilling coffee cups, bringing water, and eventually taking everyone's breakfast orders. Miguel kept his word and paid for Robert's meal, though Robert protested multiple times. The soldiers wouldn't hear it. This was their treat, their way of saying thank you to a parent who'd given up his son to service. At one point, Robert's daughter texted again, apologizing profusely for being even later than expected. Traffic had turned into a parking lot because of an accident. Robert texted back that it was fine, take her time, he was in good company. He looked up from his phone to find 6 pairs of eyes watching him with amusement. "My daughter," he explained. "We were supposed to meet for breakfast before shopping for Tommy's homecoming party. She's stuck in traffic. A homecoming party?" Patricia smiled. "That's wonderful. When does he get back?" "Next Saturday," Robert said, and just saying it made him feel warm inside. 1 more week. 7 more days. "You must be counting the hours," Danny said. "Minutes," Robert admitted. "I'm counting the minutes." Anthony pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "Sir, I don't know if this is too forward, but I'd like to give you my email address. I was stationed in the same region where your son is. There's a good chance we crossed paths, or at least served in overlapping areas. If he ever needs anything when he gets back, someone to talk to who understands, have him reach out. Same goes for you." One by one, the others did the same. They exchanged contact information, writing email addresses on napkins, programming numbers into phones. What had started as a rescue mission had turned into something more, something deeper. Connections were being made, bridges built. "You know," Robert said, looking around at all of them, his eyes getting misty again. "I came here this morning feeling proud of my son. Then for a few minutes someone tried to make me feel ashamed of that pride. But you all—" He had to stop and clear his throat. "You reminded me that there's nothing to be ashamed of. That supporting our soldiers, being proud of them, honoring their sacrifice, that's not something to hide. That's something to celebrate. Always," Miguel said firmly. "Always celebrate it. Always be proud." Lisa reached across the table and squeezed Robert's hand. "When your son comes home next week, you wear that jacket. You wear it proud. Every patch, every pin, you earned those just as much as he earned his." The breakfast eventually came and they ate together. This unlikely group of 7 people who'd been strangers an hour ago. They laughed, shared more stories, and by the time they were finished, Robert felt like he'd known them for years. As the breakfast wound down and plates were cleared away, Robert noticed the time. His daughter would be arriving any minute now, probably frantic with apologies for being so late. He looked around at the 6 people who'd changed his entire morning, his entire perspective, really, and felt a pang of sadness that this moment was ending. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I mean it." You have no idea what you did for me today. What you gave me. You don't need to thank us, Patricia said, standing up and preparing to leave. We're family. Maybe not by blood, but by something just as strong. We take care of our own, and that includes the parents who support us. The others began standing too, gathering their jackets and phones. Robert tried one more time to get their full names for proper thank you notes, maybe cards or something more, but they gently deflected. They didn't want recognition or praise. They'd done what felt right, what felt necessary, and that was enough for them. Kevin adjusted his glasses and looked at Robert with quiet intensity. Next Saturday, when your son walks off that plane or bus or however he's coming home, you stand there proud. You wear that jacket if you want to. Don't let anyone make you feel small for loving your son and supporting his choice. And if anyone ever gives you trouble again, Miguel added, his voice protective, you remember this morning. Remember that you're not alone. There are people everywhere who understand, who respect what your family has sacrificed. Lisa gave Robert a quick hug, surprising him, but warming his heart. Tell Tommy thank you from all of us, she said. And tell him to take care of himself. The transition home can be harder than people expect. They left the way they'd arrived separately, drifting back into the Saturday morning crowd like they'd never been anything special. But to Robert, they were everything. They were proof that kindness still existed, that honor and respect and human decency weren't dead, just sometimes hidden, waiting for the right moment to show themselves. Robert sat alone at the table for a few minutes, processing everything. The restaurant had returned to its normal buzz of conversation and clinking dishes. The incident with the angry man felt like it had happened days ago instead of just an hour before. He picked up his phone and looked at Tommy's picture again, the one where he was giving a thumbs up with the sunset behind him. Your dad met some good people today, son, Robert whispered to the photo. Some really good people. That's when his daughter finally rushed in, her two kids trailing behind her. She looked harried and apologetic, her hair a bit messy from the stress of bad traffic. Dad, I'm so sorry, she started immediately. The highway was a nightmare. There was an accident and then construction, and I tried to call, but... She stopped mid-sentence, noticing something different about her father. Are you okay? You look like you've been crying. Robert stood up and pulled her into a hug, then bent down to scoop up his grandchildren, who squealed with delight. I'm better than okay, sweetheart, he said, and he meant it with his whole heart. I'm perfect. Come on, let's get you all some breakfast, and then we'll go shopping for your brother's party. As they sat down and his daughter started looking at the menu, she kept glancing at him curiously. Dad, seriously, what happened? Something happened. Robert smiled and shook his head. I'll tell you later. Right now, let's just enjoy being together. We've got a party to plan. The following week passed in a blur of preparation. Robert threw himself into getting everything ready for Tommy's homecoming. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized the backyard for the barbecue, made lists and checked them twice. His daughter came over every day to help, and his younger son drove in from 2 states away to be there for his brother's return. On Saturday morning, the day Tommy was coming home, Robert woke up before dawn. He couldn't sleep, too excited and nervous and emotional all at once. He made coffee and sat in the quiet darkness of his kitchen, thinking about the past 2 years, about all the worry and fear and pride mixed together. When it was time to get dressed, he stood in front of his closet for a long moment, looking at his jacket. The one with all the patches and pins. Part of him hesitated, remembering that angry man's words, the shame he'd felt. But then he remembered 6 other voices, 6 other faces, and what they'd told him. He put the jacket on. At the base, standing with dozens of other families waiting for their soldiers to arrive, Robert felt the familiar nervousness. His daughter stood next to him with the kids, who were bouncing with excitement to see their uncle. His younger son had his phone ready to record everything. Then the doors opened and soldiers started filing out in their uniforms, searching the crowd for familiar faces. Robert's heart pounded as he scanned each face, looking for his son. And then he saw him. Tommy, looking older somehow, more mature, but with that same smile Robert knew so well. The smile he got from his mother. Tommy! Robert shouted, his voice breaking. Tommy's head whipped around, and when he saw his family, saw his dad in that jacket covered with patches, his face broke into the biggest smile Robert had ever seen. He jogged over, dropped his bag, and pulled his father into a fierce hug. Dad, Tommy said, his voice muffled against Robert's shoulder. I missed you so much. I missed you too, son, Robert managed, tears streaming down his face now. Welcome home. Welcome home. As they stood there holding each other, Robert felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned, still holding Tommy, and his breath caught. It was Anthony, one of the soldiers from the restaurant, standing there in his uniform with a huge smile on his face. I knew it, Anthony said, laughing. I knew we'd served near each other. Tommy and I were at the same base for 6 months. When he mentioned his dad lived here and told me about the jacket, I put it together. Tommy looked confused but delighted. You know my dad? We met last week, Robert explained, wiping his eyes. It's a long story, son. A really good story. More people gathered around, taking photos, hugging, laughing, crying happy tears. Robert stood in the middle of it all, his son home safe, his family complete again, wearing his jacket with pride. He thought about how a week ago he'd almost let someone make him feel ashamed of this exact moment. But he wasn't ashamed. He was proud. Proud of his son, proud of all the young men and women who served. Proud to be part of a community that understood sacrifice and honor. As they walked toward the parking lot, Tommy's arm around his shoulders, Robert looked back one more time at the crowd of reuniting families. He saw other parents wearing similar jackets, other kids holding welcome home signs, other families crying happy tears, and he understood something important. He wasn't alone. He never had been. There were thousands of parents just like him, millions even, who understood exactly what it felt like to send your child off to serve, to worry every single day, and to burst with pride when they came home safe. That angry man in the restaurant had been wrong. This wasn't something to be ashamed of. This was love. This was sacrifice. This was family. This was everything.